I was in love with William Chia for 7 years, but he fell for Grace, who lived in the slums, and married her. To marry her, he withstood the pressure from his entire family and called off our engagement. Heartbroken, I went abroad for advanced studies. By the time I returned, he and Grace had already been married for nearly 2 years, and I had long since let go. However, at the homecoming banquet held for my return, William, the same man who once defied the entire world to be with Grace, now gazed coldly at the woman he'd fought so hard to marry, his eyes filled with revulsion as he spat, "Didn't I tell you to stay home? Why come out and humiliate us both?" When I returned to the country, my domestic friends prepared a grand welcome back party for me. William was actually there. 7 years ago, he insisted on breaking off our engagement to be with Grace, despite being from an equally matched family. He even declared before all the elders of both families, "If I can't marry Grace, I'd rather wed a dog than marry Emily." His words were so insulting, showing contempt for the generations of friendship between our two families. That day, I was finally exhausted. I cried for an hour in front of my parents, pleading with them to agree to terminate the engagement. I told them I didn't want William anymore, didn't want to marry him. Seeing how heartbroken I was, my parents finally relented and personally went to discuss with William's parents behind closed doors for an hour. The final outcome was that it wasn't that William had rejected me, but rather that the Emily family refused to give their daughter's hand in marriage. Things had reached such a point that the engagement was called off, although the relationship between our two families didn't sever ties to the extent of cutting off all contact. It gradually cooled down. Later, I went to study in Paris. Today, I have returned. I looked at William compared to 7 years ago. He had grown taller and more composed, his handsome face exuding an aloof nobility, his pitch-dark eyes fixed steadily on me. No one had told me William would be here. I turned to look at Scarlett, my childhood friend hosting today's event. Scarlett quickly distanced herself, explaining, "It wasn't me who invited him, Emily. William somehow heard about your return and took it upon himself to arrange a welcome banquet for you instead of me." Then she added guiltily and defensively, "It has nothing to do with me." I remained silent, while William smiled, his tone gentle like those mornings when he'd come to take me to school before our fallout. "Emily, after all these years. Back then, I was young and impulsive in my actions, causing you pain. Today I've mustered the audacity to arrange this gathering and apologize to you properly." Pausing for a moment, he looked into my eyes and continued, "Are you still holding on to the past?" The way he put it, if I admitted I still held a grudge, I'd come off as petty and hung up on him. So I looked up, gave him a brilliant smile, and said, "You said it was the past. After all, we're all in the same circle, and it's been so long he doesn't matter to me anymore. So I let bygones be bygones, at least on the surface." I raised the glass of wine beside me, smiling breezily. "Scarlett told me you and Grace got married over a year ago. Never got to congratulate you. This one's for you." He had a calm expression. Even though he had finally married the woman he had longed for, someone with a naturally cool temperament shouldn't be wearing this detached expression. Before I could process it, he picked up his glass and drank it. It looked less like a toast of congratulations and more like he was drowning his sorrows. But I couldn't be bothered to dwell on it. Catching up with old friends and childhood pals naturally meant endless pleasantries. Being the center of attention tonight, everyone humored me by keeping conversations revolving around my affairs. Someone asked how many boyfriends I had had in France. Someone brought up my globally touring art exhibition. Some even half complained, half joked, "Honestly, Emily, why do you have to be so accomplished? Your exhibitions are always sold out, and you've opened so many galleries around the world." My old man is constantly frustrated that I'm not living up to his expectations, asking how he can get me to learn from you instead of chasing celebrities, shopping for bags, and buying sports cars all day. I laughed, just an interest. William, who had remained silent all along, smirked, "You've actually learned some modesty after all these years apart." His tone, how should I put it? It was natural, like an old friend, intimate, as if before our fallout, he hadn't used that cold, disdainful tone to say those hurtful words or done those hurtful things because of Grace. I didn't know how to respond. I didn't know if it was my imagination, but I felt his tone seemed somewhat ambiguous. While I was still figuring out how to respond, he jumped in again. "I went to see your dreams of samsara. It was really something." Not only me, but the friends around me also sensed something was off. They fell silent, their gazes darting awkwardly between William and me. I maintained a composed expression and replied politely, "Oh, thanks." After a pause, I added jokingly, "Was it with Grace that you went? Speaking of which, why isn't she here today? After all, it's been years since I last saw her. We're all old classmates here." His expression faded again as he replied offhandedly, "Oh, she had matters at home." His tone made it sound like he was talking about someone unrelated. I didn't understand why he would use such a tone and attitude when mentioning the person he once loved so recklessly, but I had no desire to entangle myself in it. So I laughed awkwardly and diverted the conversation. As the party was wrapping up, we spotted Grace sitting on a sofa in the lobby as we were exiting the clubhouse. Her eyes were fixed anxiously on the private VIP elevator, her expression tense, agitated, and uneasy. The moment the elevator doors opened, she bolted upright from the sofa. It looked as if she had been sitting there waiting for us the entire time. We all paused in surprise. She forced a smile, her eyes sweeping around the room until they fell upon me standing beside William. Her face instantly turned pale. She gazed at me blankly, looking utterly devastated, as if confronting a formidable foe. I was bewildered. Grace had changed a lot. I remembered the first time I saw her, it was when she transferred to our class in the second semester of sophomore year. At that time, she was wearing her school uniform, standing at the front of the classroom. She looked thin, almost malnourished, with clothes hanging loosely on her frame. Her features were ordinary and nondescript, her face bearing an uneasy, constrained tension. The homeroom teacher, however, was beaming with joy, saying, "Here's Grace. She has been ranking high in every provincial joint exam. Everyone, welcome her." In the silence, countless scrutinizing gazes fell upon Grace. We were at a prestigious private high school where everyone came from affluent or influential families. Academic performance wasn't the sole criterion for acceptance, let alone someone like Grace with her unpresentable demeanor. I felt somewhat sorry for her, so I smiled and took the initiative to clap. Only then did scattered applause emerge from the class, eventually growing until it filled every corner of the classroom. The homeroom teacher gave me a grateful smile and gestured toward me as she told Grace, "This is Emily, our class president. You can come to her with any questions you might have." But even though the teacher had said that, Grace never came to me for help. Because she was protected by William, my boyfriend at the time. When Grace transferred, the only seat left in the class was next to William, so she became his desk mate. I don't know if that's where their betrayal began to germinate. For example, Grace came from a poor family and suffered from severe hypoglycemia and anemia. Once during the morning study session, she suddenly passed out, and it was William who carried her to the infirmary. For instance, when Aunt Chia returned from Belgium, she brought many gifts for both me and William. When Aunt Chia told me to pick first, William, who was standing nearby, took out a box of handmade chocolates and said, "I'll take this box." I was confused because William didn't like sweets and had never shown any particular interest in chocolate. Later, he even asked me for the recipe of the pastries made by my family chef. I couldn't be bothered, so I just had the chef make some and send them directly to him. At the time, I thought William's taste had changed. It wasn't until later that I saw candy wrappers on Grace's desk along with the chef-made pastries from my family that I had given to William. It was Grace who loved chocolate, and Grace who adored pastries and sweets. I convinced myself that this was just William's way of caring for his poor desk mate, even though he wasn't a kind person who meddled in others' affairs or acted as a savior. In truth, I wasn't without suspicions, but Grace seemed so unremarkably ordinary that the notion of William betraying me by falling in love with her never once crossed my mind. After all, I was so outstanding, the most beautiful girl in the entire school. How could I have ever imagined that William would betray me by falling in love with Grace? But now, 7 years later, Grace no longer appeared frail and shabby as she once did. From head to toe, she was draped in haute couture garments and designer bags. The oversized logos plastered across her attire, though costly, exuded a vulgar ostentation that clashed with her demeanor. She walked over and offered a polite smile, greeting, "Ah, Emily, you're back." After saying this, her gaze darted uncertainly between me and William, with a probing look that made me uncomfortable. I frowned slightly, a flicker of annoyance crossing my face. William spoke first, his tone cold. "What brings you here?" Grace glanced cautiously at William's expression, her smile carrying an inexplicably pitiful edge of appeasement. "I went shopping. The club owner said you were here with friends throwing Emily a welcome party, so I came to wait, to go back together." Her excuse was riddled with holes. She held up the bag in her hand to show William. "The manager here heard I was present and specially sent 2 bottles of wine, claiming it's to pay respects to Mrs. Chia and William." She stressed the words Mrs. Chia as if staking her claim. William, who had been expressionless, now frowned with displeasure. I heard a friend behind me couldn't help but let out a stifled snicker. Given the Chia family's status, not only would the club manager need to schedule an appointment half a month in advance to meet William, the same applies to the owner. Yet here was his wife clutching 2 bottles of wine from a mere manager like precious trophies, eagerly presenting them to William as if showing off rare offerings. It was indeed rather tacky and beneath her standing. It was clear that such embarrassing incidents had happened many times since Grace married William over a year ago. William's voice was impatient and unsparing. "Didn't I tell you to stay home? Why did you come out to embarrass yourself in public?" A friend snorted behind me. Grace's already pale face suddenly turned deathly pale as she gazed at William helplessly. She didn't know why William had suddenly gotten angry, nor where she had gone wrong. No one explained why, and no one told her what to do. Everyone was laughing at her lack of sophistication and her inability to present herself appropriately. I was taken aback by William's attitude. Subconsciously turning my head to look at him, his face remained cold and detached, utterly indifferent to the muffled, suppressed laughter around him, as if the one being ridiculed wasn't the woman he had gone through so much to marry. I paused, taken aback. He wasn't like this before. Back in high school, Grace was ostracized by the class for being an outsider. Later, when William called off our engagement over her, I bullied Grace as well. Yet every time, William would stand before Grace, shielding her from harm and speaking up in her defense. Yet now, he stood here looking down at Grace before him, his expression frosty, with barely perceptible weariness and impatience lingering in the depths of his gaze. He was a far cry from the way he was back then. How could he disdain Grace? Had he forgotten how he had treated me when defending her back then? The first time William stood up for Grace was during an English class. For us, among all subjects, English was the one we handled with the most ease. Since the age of 2, there were several resident English foreign teachers at our home, and all daily communication and interactions were conducted entirely in English. From grammar to pronunciation, everything was as standard as British aristocracy, one of the basic skills we were required to possess. That day, the English teacher called on Grace to read a passage aloud, and as soon as she stood up and uttered the first sound, a murmur arose from the class below. Halfway through her reading, someone couldn't hold back and burst out laughing with a pfft sound. Undeniably, her academic performance was excellent, but she probably hadn't received systematic education. Her pronunciation was awkward, tinged with an embarrassing awkwardness. The laughter seemed contagious, gradually swelling into a clamor until Grace stood there, no longer uttering a sound. The English teacher was also somewhat helpless, had her sit down, and did her best to shift the topic. After class, Scarlett deliberately walked over to Grace, loudly mimicking her pronunciation while mocking her in English with her companions. Her imitation was exaggeratedly perfect, and the classmates nearby couldn't help but laugh. Grace sat at her desk with her head bowed, her forehead fringes hanging limply. From my side view, I couldn't discern her expression, but her slender profile revealed little except the barely contained emotions trembling through her shoulders. I'm not sure why, but a pang of listlessness suddenly washed over me. I wanted to call out to stop Scarlett, telling her not to pick on the new classmate, but before I could speak up, William, who wasn't one to get involved in others' affairs, took action first. He had been lying face down on his desk, asleep. Hearing Scarlett's mocking laughter, he sat up expressionlessly, casually grabbed the copy of Harry Potter in front of him, and rapped the thick cover against the desk, the dull thudding echoing distinctly. Amidst the noise, he glared coldly at Scarlett, who was taunting Grace, and snapped, "Shut up. It's annoying." Scarlett's smile froze on her face, and the classroom was plunged into deathly silence. My gaze fell on William and paused. Then, I turned to Scarlett, offering a gentle smile to break the deathly awkward silence. "Scarlett, class is starting soon," I said. Scarlett turned to me with a hushing gesture, nodding as she pulled her friends back to their seats and said obediently, "Got it." Out of the corner of my eye, I saw Grace turning her head toward William, bright-eyed, murmuring something to him in a low voice. I assumed she was thanking him. Yet William's expression was subdued, betraying little emotion. Later, after lunch, I encountered Grace in the library again. The library was least crowded at noon because most people were eating, napping, or chatting about the latest gossip. She was sitting in a secluded corner by the window, and I could hear her straining through each sound as she practiced her pronunciation with a small audio player. I didn't take it seriously and laid my head down on the other side, ready to sleep. Until I noticed William. He entered the library, still handsome with his nonchalant air, holding his original English edition of Harry Potter, and walked all the way to Grace's side before coming to a stop. Standing next to Grace, he said, "Practicing like this isn't going to work." Then he sat down next to her, opened his copy of Harry Potter and pointed to a sentence, saying, "Read this sentence to me." Encouraged by his words, Grace's face turned red as she struggled for a long time before murmuring in a small, faltering voice, piecing out the words bit by bit. Mr. Dursley might have been drifting into an uneasy sleep, but the cat outside the wall showed no sign of sleepiness. William's finger rested on the word drifting, and I heard him patiently teaching Grace how to pronounce it with a beautiful British accent. The library was serenely silent, sunlight streaming through the vast windows, illuminating tiny golden dust motes dancing in the air. Those two gentle figures bathed in sunlight resembled a painting. Of course, up until this point, none of this had anything to do with Grace. She was merely passively accepting William's help. In the end, I saw her staring at William, her cheeks gradually reddening, before she whispered admiringly to him, "I really envy Emily." What she envied needed no explanation. From that moment on, I began to resent Grace. Of course, no one could have detected that I disliked Grace. I have always been calm and easygoing. Although my classmates followed my lead, I never engaged in forming cliques or schemes to isolate others. The first time I targeted her was during PE class, where boys and girls were separated to practice tennis, with everyone choosing their own partners. Unsurprisingly, Grace was left standing alone. Clutching her racket, she stood awkwardly in the middle of the court, her face turning crimson as she glanced around, helplessly appearing utterly vulnerable and pitiful. I smiled, walked over to her, and extended my hand. "Let's team up." She looked surprised, flustered, stammering, "Me?" I nodded with a smile and replied, "Yes, you." She smiled at me with a look of deep gratitude. I thought about that scene of her and William in the library. As I turned away, my smile vanished completely, and I thought expressionlessly, hoping she'd still be able to smile after this. Grace didn't manage to return a single one of my serves. It was like taking a dog for a walk every time I served. I sent the ball precisely where Grace couldn't possibly reach. She scrambled desperately, running and straining to catch it, yet ended up retrieving the ball each time. While picking up the balls, she kept apologizing, "Sorry. I'm so terrible at this." She didn't realize I was deliberately messing with her until classmates began to gather around us, and I heard someone behind me whisper, "What's gotten into Emily? She's never targeted someone like this before. When did the new girl cross Emily?" I smiled, feigning obliviousness, and delivered one tricky serve after another until Grace stumbled and fell while lunging for my shot. I stood there smiling and offered an apology without a hint of sincerity, "Oops, terribly sorry." She kept her head down, clutching her swollen and reddened knee, and whispered tremulously, It's okay." I smiled amiably and continued, "Your tennis skills are truly awful. Do try not to hold me back during the team match later." Grace kept apologizing while struggling awkwardly to get back on her feet. Everyone around was watching the drama until William walked over. He glanced at me, then took the racket from Grace, teary-eyed and trembling, and fixed me with a cold stare. He smiled and said, "She's not good, Emily. I'll take your place." I was thoroughly crushed by William for fairness. He even used his left hand. At 12, he had already won the junior tennis championship, while I had only practiced for 2 or 3 years back then just to share a common topic with him. My amateur skills were nowhere near his level. I persisted in playing against him for half an hour, managing to return only a few shots. But luckily, I didn't need to pick up the balls. Every time I failed to return one, there would be one of the boys with a crush on me picking it up and passing it to me. I just stubbornly stared at William, who showed not an ounce of mercy. Until the final serve, when he struck the ball, it grazed the net and slammed into my knee, the exact same spot where Grace had fallen and injured hers earlier. The pain was so intense I couldn't hold back, and had someone not gasped and stepped in to support me, I would have collapsed to the ground in agony. William remained unmoved, his gaze icy as he stated coldly, "Emily, with skills like yours, even if no one's dragging you down, you still don't stand a chance." After saying that, he turned to Grace and motioned for her to come, saying, "Come here. Let's go." Grace gazed at him like Xia beholding the supreme treasure descending from the sky. She nodded meekly and answered, "Okay." Later, some classmates helped me to the infirmary. After the medicine was applied, Scarlett kept me company. Scarlett, who was always so sensed something was off that day and asked me, "Emily, was William crazy?" Scarlett's words became a prophecy. What he did afterward was nothing short of madness. But now, how laughable, he actually regrets it. How laughable. It wasn't until several days after the welcome banquet that Scarlett finally dared to call me. She asked timidly, "Emily, are you mad?" I casually replied while mixing the paints, "Why would I be angry?" She didn't speak. After a while, she sighed and said, Emily, I have to ask you something in secret. Do you still like William?" I was so shocked by her words that I nearly toppled from my chair. After steadying my composure, I asked Scarlett, caught between laughter and disbelief, "What part of my behavior led you to such a misunderstanding? Tell me quickly so I can fix it." She hesitated for a moment, then said, "Because I think William, he seems to regret marrying Grace, and I'm telling you, before you returned home, William asked me about your news several times." She went on to tell me some gossip I had missed. After I left the country heartbroken and in a fit of anger to further my studies, the engagement between William and me fell through, but Aunt Chia remained adamantly against his relationship with Grace. William probably truly loved Grace. He stayed in the country to attend university with her and, after graduating, left the Chia family to start his own company without taking a single penny from the family. Honestly, although everyone felt rather indignant on your behalf back then, we were all quite moved by how William made such a grand gesture for Grace. It was true love, after all. Eventually, the Chia family couldn't out stubborn William. He was, after all, the sole heir and only son. After a year-long stalemate, they relented and consented to his marriage to Grace. As a result, on the wedding day, the Chia family was publicly humiliated. Grace might have come from the slums, but her family was far from small. Moreover, her parents were eager to flaunt their newfound status. Distant relatives and neighbors who'd heard the Lin family's daughter had climbed up the social ladder all came dragging their entire households to the wedding banquet to drink the wedding wine. William probably tried to save face for Grace in front of his family, so the banquet tables weren't separated. The Chia family's relatives, business partners, and the Lin family's relatives were all in the same banquet hall. The result was predictable, a boisterous crowd clamoring noisily, children running wild and shrieking everywhere, and the Lin parents loudly boasting about their daughter's remarkable ability to completely beguile the Chia family's eldest son into utter submission. It was said that one of Grace's uncles, putting on airs during the toast ceremony, even demanded William kneel and kowtow to him. William, the pampered heir who had likely only ever knelt at the Chia family's ancestral shrine. That very night, Aunt Chia was so enraged that she was hospitalized. That was just the beginning of their wedding. Later, Grace's family frequently exploited William's reputation for their schemes. William handled numerous messy situations, Grace's brother causing a fatal drunk driving accident, her uncle demanding house purchases, her aunt's children requiring school placements, her disabled father needing employment. The piling up of major and minor matters over time has completely exhausted what little affection William had left for Grace. I listened indifferently, not knowing why I suddenly thought of William standing before me back then, explaining the way he had fallen in love with Grace. He had said coldly, each word enunciated with precision, "Emily, you were born into smooth sailing as a privileged girl with every wish granted, while Grace had nothing yet. She took root in the mud and forged her own dazzling light through tenacious growth. I truly love Grace. I love her thriving vitality and indomitable soul. His words from back then were still vivid in my memory, but his admiration and affection for her were now nearly depleted. So what? Has Grace's vitality withered, or has her indomitable soul ceased to shine in his eyes? How utterly laughable. I absent-mindedly cut Scarlett off, my tone tinged with frost. I don't give a damn about him and Grace. His affairs are none of my concern. I don't want to hear it and couldn't care less. Not another word about him, Scarlett, or consider our friendship over. All right, Scarlett hurriedly apologized. I won't mention him again. I just wanted the best for you, after all, you were. She swallowed the rest of her words. But I knew what she was going to say. After all, back then, I had liked William so much. But the past is like the wind. Who in the world likes just one person in their whole life? Especially someone who has hurt you. I still talk to William at all simply because I'm a gracious and dignified person, and he means nothing to me now. If possible, I would rather not have any interactions with William and Grace at all. But it seems I'm the only one who feels this way, while those two clearly hold a different view. I ran into William at a business reception. We move in the same circles, so it's only natural we'd bump into each other constantly. I stepped onto the terrace needing a break from the stifling atmosphere when William came over carrying a glass of red wine. He stood beside me and exchanged pleasantries in a lowered voice. I absent-mindedly humored him until the moment he turned his profile to peer into the distance at the layered mountain peaks, his entire demeanor radiating profound desolation. After prolonged hesitation, he finally asked with an apologetic lilt, "Emily, have you been well abroad these years?" I turned my head slightly, giving him a sardonic half-smile as I reminded him, "William, you're married. With this moonlit ambience, do you really find it proper to initiate such a conversation with your ex-fiancé?" I spoke bluntly, but he chuckled nonchalantly, just catching up between old friends. "You're being too sensitive, Emily." I said pointedly, "Sorry, but given your history, isn't that right?" He paused for a moment, his face showing no anger but rather a bitter smile. With a heavy sigh, he turned his gaze back to the distant landscape. "I'm just too tired," he said. Everyone knew why he was weary. The wife William had married had become the laughingstock of the entire circle. It's rare for the Chia family to become a laughingstock. I didn't follow up on his words. Instead, I leisurely picked up my own glass of wine from the side and made to leave. Before departing, I offered him a perfectly courteous smile and remarked, "But this is the person you chose after such careful consideration, isn't it?" The next time we met was at Mrs. Chia's birthday party. Since I returned to the country, Aunt Chia had been calling me often. Over the years, the relationship between our families had cooled, but we still maintained some business dealings, and besides, Aunt Chia had always been very fond of me. I can sarcastically criticize William for betraying me, but I can't fail to show due respect to Aunt Chia. She called me personally, her voice carrying a hint of reproach, "Emily, Auntie's birthday is next Wednesday. Can you make it? You left for 7 whole years without even a single call. When an elder personally invites you, it's hard to refuse as a junior." After hanging up the phone, I went to pick out a suitable gift. When I arrived at the Chia family's home, I realized something was off. The birthday party wasn't a grand affair, nor were there any outsiders, just some relatives of the Chia family. So my presence seemed a bit out of place. I paused for a moment, but Mrs. Chia was delighted to see me. She was surrounded by women of the Chia family, William's aunts and aunts by marriage, all familiar elders. Aunt Chia waved me over and asked me to sit beside her. I hesitated, not wanting to make things awkward in such an occasion, so I maintained a smile and walked over to sit beside Aunt Chia. I didn't catch sight of Grace. Aunt Chia held my hand and looked at me carefully. Her eyes grew moist for some reason, and with a tone full of emotion, she said, "I've watched this child grow up before my eyes, and now she's blossomed into such a radiant and accomplished young woman." The people around her echoed her words and began showering me with compliments. Aunt Chia listened to the compliments from those around her and smiled nostalgically. "The first time I saw this child was when she was 5. Her parents had just moved into the neighborhood next door, dressed her in a puffy pink dress, and she came over sweetly smiling while being led by her mother to deliver neighborly gifts. Right then I thought to myself, why couldn't I have borne a daughter? In such situations, there was no need for me to speak, all I needed was to remain silent and smile at the appropriate moments. William and Grace returned during dinner. William, likely aware of my presence, wasn't he too surprised upon seeing me and even gave me a nod. Grace beside him, however, turned pale again upon spotting me, appearing utterly distraught. She forced a smile and greeted her, "Mom, happy birthday." And she glanced at her briefly, her face icy as if she hadn't heard a word. She offered no response. Instead, she held my hand and led me to the dining room, saying, "Dear child, come sit with Auntie." By this point, even someone as oblivious as I was could tell something was amiss. The awkwardness reached its peak during dinner, because all the dishes placed before me were ones I used to love. Auntie introduced each dish with sympathy. "Child, you must have suffered so much out there, you look thinner now. Try this clear soup with bird's nest, it used to be your favorite when you were little." Whenever William made you angry, he would coax you with this dish and you'd cheer right up. Sister Juan in the kitchen knew this was made for you and started soaking and preparing the bird's nest 4 or 5 days ago. Go ahead and see if it's the same flavor you remember from the past. Crash. Amidst Aunt Chia's words, a clatter erupted from across the table. I looked up to see Grace, perhaps due to distraction or nervousness, knock over her plate. A servant moved to clean up, but Grace, no one knew what she was thinking, flusteredly rejected the help. She pulled out a napkin and crouched to wipe the floor herself, stammering frantic apologies, "Sorry, sorry." When Grace was about to crouch under the table in front of the entire gathering, William reached out and grabbed her arm. His face expressionless, he stared coldly at her and said, "Enough. Look at what a spectacle you've become." He turned to the servant beside him and instructed, "Sister Ling, come and clean this up." Aunt Chi was probably livid, her breathing rapid and shallow. I heard her exclaiming, "What a disgrace, what a disgrace. At least we're among family. We can keep this behind closed doors." She turned to me and asked, "Emily, look at this, look at this." She must have been truly beside herself with anger, as she said bluntly in front of Grace, without any restraint, "If William had married you in the first place, we wouldn't be in this mess." She clutched her chest, probably from heartache caused by anger, and held my hand while blurting out without thinking, "Emily, Emily, I remember how fond you were of William. The fool acted foolishly and hurt you, but what's past is past. Can you find it in your heart to forgive him? For your auntie's sake, could you grant him forgiveness this once?" The entire dining room was so quiet you could hear a pin drop. Everyone's eyes were fixed on me, and even William turned his gaze toward me. Yet, he showed no reaction to his mother uttering such words in front of his wife. He merely gazed at me calmly, as though awaiting my response. Grace clutched her hand over her mouth and fled the room with choked sobs, but no one bothered to tend to her. I leisurely placed my chopsticks on the table, smiled first, and then addressed Auntie Chi, saying, "Auntie Chi, I'm glad you invited me here for your birthday celebration despite keeping it simple. You doted on me the most when I was little. Even after William betrayed me afterward, I've never forgotten your kindness. Today being your birthday, as a junior I ought to keep you happy. But the question you just asked, it's truly hard to answer." I paused for a moment, smiled gracefully, and acknowledged everyone's gazes. Finally, I said, "Aunt Chi, I must apologize, but I have returned this time to introduce my boyfriend to the family. I am getting engaged. You've watched me grow up, and no matter what happened, let bygones be bygones. I hope you can attend and witness this happy occasion." The room fell silent. Aunt Chi stared at me in shock, and after a long while, she finally managed, How come there was no word about this?" After a long silence, she continued, "To which esteemed family does the fortunate young man belong?" I lowered my eyes. "Liam, the eldest son of the Liam family." I heard a sharp intake of breath around us. Aunt Chi remained silent for what felt like an age before William's aunt stepped in to smooth things over, chuckling, "What a perfectly matched union, a marriage made in heaven. Emily is truly blessed." I smiled demurely and remained silent. William looked at me, his face devoid of emotion yet his eyes holding complicated depths. After a moment, he smiled a self-deprecating smile and said, "Congratulations." I inclined my head to him with regal poise, smiling, "Thank you." This seemed to bring closure to matters related to the Chi family. After that, Aunt Chi finally stopped calling me I heard she had been hospitalized again for a period of time. The last time I met Grace was in my gallery. I was chatting with Scarlett. My assistant came in and said someone wanted to buy one of my paintings at a high price but requested to speak with me. When I stepped out, I saw Grace standing before one of my paintings. When she heard my footsteps, she turned to look at me. It was strange. I had always remembered her as timid and awkward, never knowing what to do with her hands. But when it was just the two of us, all her timidity and nervousness seemed to vanish, leaving only a certain seething hatred directed at me. She looked at me and asked, "Emily, you're laughing at me, aren't you?" I laughed. Frankly, I have a lot on my plate and countless people to meet every day. I don't have time to pay attention to someone who means nothing to me. I responded impassively, "You're overinterpreting things." She looked at me and suddenly covered her face, bursting into tears. "You know what? William's divorcing me. I heard him talking to the divorce attorney. He's throwing me away. I don't know why you're already getting engaged, so why would he divorce me now? What did I do wrong? My only mistake was my birth. I don't have a family like yours or the same education. You're all laughing at me, thinking I'm not good enough for your world, but how is any of that my fault? I also want to be you, to have a prominent family that everyone adores. But I don't have a family like yours. You were simply born into better circumstances. If we were on the same starting line, I wouldn't be this humiliated. If you were me, you wouldn't have ended up where I am now." He had a calm expression. Given that he had finally married the woman he had always yearned for, even if he was reserved by nature, he shouldn't have appeared so apathetic. She was crying bitterly, though fortunately the gallery stood empty at that moment. I had no intention of engaging with her, but she made it clear she wasn't leaving until she finished crying. I figured she must have held on to these words and all that resentment for so long, needing somewhere to unburden herself. Even if the person was me. I thought of how she had groveled and catered to everyone in the Chia family. Sighing, I said, "Grace, you're wrong. If I were you, I wouldn't have ended up where you are today. First, I remember you did very well academically back in the day. If I were you, after graduating from college, I wouldn't stay in the Chia family living off their support. I would leverage the connections and funds of the Chia family to start my own career. Second, you say your family is poor and you don't have an education like mine. If I were you, after marrying William, I would learn social etiquette, social manners, and fashion aesthetics. I would watch more, listen more, and speak less. But unfortunately, you've been married to William for almost 2 years now, and compared to the you from 7 years ago, I see no improvement whatsoever in you. Third, I wouldn't tolerate the whole extended family openly acting like incompetent bloodsuckers without shame. Your natal family should be your backbone, yet your entire relatives cling to the Chia family like parasites. How could you expect the Chia family to respect you? Saying all this was meddling in others' affairs. Why did I even advise Grace? I couldn't quite explain it myself. Perhaps it was because of that Grace from years ago, nervous and uneasy on the podium, trying so hard to integrate into a new environment, striving to carve her own path through study and self-reliance. Now that she had ended up like this, I didn't know what to say. Grace lowered her hands from her face, her tear stains clearly visible. She sobbed, but like a drowning person spotting a lifebuoy, her eyes gradually lit up as she listened to my words. She said, So if I do as you say now, does that mean there's still hope?" She was truly beyond saving. Every sliver of hope she had in the Chia family depended entirely on William's love. Now that even he was abandoning her, it was far too late for her to start doing what should have been done 2 years ago. I looked at her with pity, considering it a way to accumulate virtue through good deeds as I offered advice. "You said William has been contacting divorce lawyers, Grace. If I were you, I would take the initiative to propose divorce to William now. You have a prenuptial agreement. Perhaps the Chia family might even feel guilty seeing you act with such measured judgment, and offer you greater compensation." She shook her head, laughing through tears, her eyes locked on mine. No, Emily, there's still hope for William and me. We can still make it work." After saying this, she turned around and left in a dazed hurry, likely to make a last-ditch effort. Scarlett came out from behind me and said, "I thought you hated her." I turned back and smiled at Scarlett, saying, "I never considered her a rival." I only pity her life. She saw William as her biggest stake to change her destiny. She grabbed this chance and married him, but she forgot that her greatest asset should have been continuous and unremitting effort invested in herself. Life is shaped by continuous choices. What is human destiny? It is the final outcome formed by the accumulation of all the choices you made over time. Grace attributed all she was enduring now to her family. She was wrong. The reason she had ended up where she was lay in the fact that, at every step of her life's journey, she had chosen the wrong path. Later, I heard that the divorce proceedings in the Chia family dragged on for a long time because Grace kept stalling and refused to divorce. The public scandal was humiliating, and the entire social circle witnessed this public spectacle several times. Later, the commotion gradually subsided, and how it was ultimately settled remained unknown to outsiders. A year later, when I got engaged, the Chia family also attended. I saw William's fiancée, the daughter of the owner of a well-known chain bakery with whom I was acquainted. The two stood together, a perfect social match. Everyone exchanged pleasantries while congratulating William. Gathered in groups with shared conversation topics, no one caused awkward scenes inviting ridicule anymore. No one mentioned Grace, who had been mocked for marrying into the upper-class circle. She vanished completely from our entire social sphere, as if she'd never existed in the first place. Everything was glamorous and elegant. Holding a glass of champagne and watching everyone dance in the garden, my fiancé walked over, resting his hand on my shoulder, and affectionately asked, "What are you thinking?" I smiled and replied, "Nothing,